It is the middle of the night and you wake up to a loud knock on your front door. You get out of bed and the police are standing there. They tell you and your family to gather your belongings and come with them. Scared and uncertain, you are taken to a camp full of other people of your same ethnicity. Your country has also just entered a terrible war after being bombed by a foreign enemy. Now you and your family are considered a threat to national security by the government. They interrogate you. Are you a spy? Are you working for the enemy? And all you can do is helplessly think to yourself, of course not, I was born in this country. Yet, every single day, you still face the same discrimination. Just imagine yourself in this situation. Would you be terrified? Would you be angry? Or would you still be willing to serve that same country in their war? Almost all Japanese found themselves in a situation similar to this one after the bombing at Pearl Harbor. As you can see in slide 2, many Japanese Americans were sent to relocation camps. Despite all of the discrimination that they faced, they were still willing to fight for their country, the United States of America. Many people probably do not realize the great impact that the Japanese Americans had on World War II. However, without their help, it is very likely that many more American lives would have been lost. From taking many history classes in high school and in college, I have become very interested with the Japanese American side of the story. I believe that everyone should be more aware of the impact that they had on World War II. After much extensive research, I am now going to share with you how the Japanese Americans played important roles in World War II in the U.S. Army Ground Forces and in the Military Intelligence Service. First, let's take a look how they played a role in the U.S. Army Ground Forces. According to George Flynn, who wrote the book The Draft, 1940 to 1973, and Morris McGregor Jr., who wrote the book Integration of the Armed Forces, 1940 to 1965, the U.S. Army was the only part of the military that would accept Japanese Americans. According to Flynn and McGregor, the U.S. Navy, Air Corps, and Marines refused to accept Japanese Americans because they found them inferior for battle and less intelligent. Now, most of these Japanese Americans were actually second-generation Japanese Americans who grew up going to American schools. They spoke English, and they had many of the same values that most Americans do. Flynn and McGregor also said that 3,000 of these Nisei enlisted in the U.S. Army by the summer of 1941. They were eager to join to prove their loyalty to the United States, and they wanted accepted into mainstream society. However, Pearl Harbor had a very big impact on the Nisei's role in the Army. According to Todd Kunioka and Karen McCurdy, who wrote the article Relocation and Internment, Civil Rights Lessons from World War II in the journal PS Political Science and Politics, 3 months after Pearl Harbor, 120,000 Japanese Americans were detained and relocated by the United States government into these camps. According to Dylan Meyer, who was actually the director of the War Relocation Authority in World War II, who wrote the book Uprooted Americans in 1971, said that on June 17, 1942, the U.S. War Department declared that Japanese Americans could no longer serve in the United States Armed Forces, except for in extreme cases. Meyer also said that 6,000 Nisei that were already enrolled in the Army were quickly dismissed, except for the Japanese and the Hawaii National Guard, whose citizens felt that they were desperately needed to defend the islands. According to Heike Hausenauer, who wrote the article Go for Broke in Soldier magazine in 2003, by late summer and fall of 1942, leaders in Washington, D.C. changed their minds. They decided that they would allow the Nisei to serve in combat in Europe, but not in Japan. According to Meyer, the 100th Infantry Battalion and the 442nd Combat Team was the first battalion composed of only 6,000 Japanese Americans recruited from relocation centers and from Hawaii. As you can see on slide 3, there's a picture there depicting what would probably be as similar to the 100th Infantry Battalion and 442nd Combat Team. Meyer also stated that by August of 1943, the 100th Battalion was deployed to Italy, and by the end of World War II, over 9,000 Japanese Americans had served in the war. Meyer also said that the Nisei won over 1,000 Purple Hearts, 33 Silver Stars, 31 Bronze Stars, 9 Distinguished Service Crosses, and 3 Legion of Merit badges, proving their bravery and commitment to serving in battle in World War II. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at the Japanese Americans' role in the Army Ground Forces, let's take a look at their role in the Military Intelligence Service. According to Masaharu Anu, who wrote the article Loyal Linguists, Nisei of World War II, Learn Japanese in Minnesota in Minnesota History Magazine, and John Weckerling, who wrote Japanese Americans Play a Vital Role in United States Intelligence Service in World War II, the Japanese Americans in relocation camps were interviewed and recruited for the Military Intelligence Service. First, the Military Intelligence Service desperately needed to find Japanese who could translate for them and pick up different documents and be able to translate those as well. However, going back to what the Nisei were, they were second generation Japanese Americans who only spoke English. So, according to Anno and Weckerling, the MIS, or the Military Intelligence Service, turned to the Kiebi, who were Japanese Americans who went over to Japan for their education and later returned to the United States. They were fluent in Japanese, and they were the first to be trained and sent over to the Pacific Front. According to Meyer, they needed more people able to interpret and translate, so the Nisei, who mostly spoke English, were sent to a language school at Camp Shelby in Mississippi to develop their Japanese. Anno and Weckerling described that the language school's first class only consisted of 58 Nisei who were found loyal and adequate enough by the United States government. Eventually, these Nisei language graduates were sent to the Pacific Front with other military combat units, according to Meyer. Meyer also said that they interpreted Japanese orders heard only yards away in combat for U.S. commanders, identified and translated Japanese documents that were intercepted, and they served as translators that accompanied patrols around villages and camps in the Pacific. As you can see on slide 4, there is a picture depicting a Japanese American in the Military Intelligence Service. Also, according to Allison Gilmore, who wrote the book You Can't Fight Tanks with Bayonets, Psychological Warfare Against the Japanese Army in the Pacific Southwest, and Joseph Harrington, who wrote Yankee Samurai, The Secret Role of Nisei in the American Pacific Victory, the Military Intelligence Service, KAB, and Nisei played a key role in psychological warfare as well. According to Harrington and James McNaughton, who wrote the book Nisei Linguists, Japanese Americans in the Military Intelligence Service during World War II, by December 1944, 2,600 Japanese prisoners of war were interrogated by 25 graduates of the Nisei Language School. Overseas, according to Gilmore and Harrington, KAB and Nisei and the MIS manipulated the Japanese people, soldiers, and government with radio messages and pamphlets that they dropped from airplanes. After Japan was defeated, the MIS, KAB, and Nisei were also used to sustain peace. This is according to an article in the Pacific Citizen in 1945 called Nisei in Postwar Japan. In this same article, it states that 2,700 linguists were sent to Japan after the war to serve as language bridge between the United States and Japan. So, overall, the Japanese Americans were able to overcome racial prejudice and prove their loyalty, skill, and bravery by serving in the United States Army Ground Forces and Military Intelligence Service in World War II. Quoted by Meyer, Colonel Sidney Mashburn, a leader on the Pacific Front, stated, "If it wasn't for the loyalty, fidelity, patriotism, and ability of the American Nisei, the war would have been much longer and even more dangerous. And as you can see on slide 5, Harry Truman also welcomed home the 100th Battalion and 442nd Combat Team and praised them for their bravery. So through their service, they were able to prove themselves as American citizens and influence the opinions of other Americans for generations to come. Without a doubt, Japanese Americans raised the bar of patriotism for future Americans of all backgrounds to follow.